Hello and welcome to Let's Break Bread. I'm Stance, your host, inviting you into a wide-ranging conversation where we untangle everything we thought we knew about bodies, food, and eating disorder recovery. In conversation with guests from all corners of the anti-diet world, we'll dig into what it means to inhabit a body and defend it against a culture obsessed with so-called health and wellness. Whether you're in active ed recovery, tired of chasing hollow, unattainable standards, or just want to hear more about falling in love with life in the body you have now, this podcast is for you. Welcome back to Let's Break Bread. Today, I want to talk about recovery in a larger body and also just giving up dieting in a larger body. But before I dive into any of that, I do want to give a bit of a disclaimer that no recovery from an eating disorder is easy. I do think that recovering in a larger body has different challenges, and that's what we're going to talk about. But I never want this to sound like I think it's easy peasy to recover from the typical eating disorder that you hear about. Anorexia is an evil, evil beast, and I don't mean to say that it's easy in any way. We're just going to talk about some of the difficulties that happen on the other end when you are recovering in a larger body. But to be clear, eating disorders are very, very serious. It doesn't matter what eating disorder, it is serious. Eating disorders are the second most fatal mental illness. And so we need to take that seriously, no matter what eating disorder we're talking about. So I hope that's clear. And I want to talk now about recovery in a larger body. Everything we're taught about eating disorders is that the person is going to be very malnourished and underweight. I was taught in school that eating disorders look like a malnourished person, and it was not possible to have an eating disorder if you were not underweight. So while that's what we were taught, less than 6% of people who have eating disorders are underweight. Let's just sit with that for a second. Less than 6%. And along the same vein, binge eating disorder is more common than anorexia and bulimia combined. But what we're taught is all about anorexia and bulimia. I was never taught anything about binge eating disorder. And so there's something weird going on. We are taught that eating disorders look like this one very specific thing, an underweight young white girl. But that doesn't represent even at all the majority. And so that's why I really want to talk about the other side and recovering in a larger body. I also want to note that we should not automatically assume someone in a larger body is struggling with binge eating disorder. People in larger bodies have all types of eating disorders, and I want us to break the link of what a person's body looks like and what their diagnosis is. There is a diagnosis called atypical anorexia, and it's a diagnosis that I hate the name. I hate atypical anorexia because it really just means you have all the same problems and behaviors that are associated with anorexia, but your body is not emaciated. And the thing that happens in our brain is that we're kind of a failed anorexic, meaning like we're not eating, but we're still not losing the weight. But we have all the same behaviors. We're just as restrictive as those with anorexia. And there's something happening in our body to keep us alive. And that's impressive and cool and incredible. But the name atypical anorexia is difficult, and it makes it seem like something is wrong with you if you get that diagnosis instead of being diagnosed with anorexia. So just break the link in your head that a bigger bodied person has binge eating disorder and a smaller bodied person has anorexia, and instead think that people of all body sizes can have all types of eating disorders. It should also be noted that 25 to 40% of people with eating disorders are boys and men, those identifying as male. And transgender people are up to 4 times more likely to struggle with an eating disorder than cisgender people. So again, breaking the link in your head, an eating disorder is not just some young, white, thin girl. Instead, we're thinking all people, all bodies, all genders. Eating disorders are a people problem, not a young, thin women problem. Unfortunately, higher weight people with eating disorders are encouraged by doctors all the time to use eating disorder behaviors to lose weight. And that is because a lot of doctors are very fat phobic. There is such a thing as anti-fat bias, and that is the idea and the inherent belief that people in larger bodies are somehow less worthy, or there's a moral failing with people in larger bodies, and that if you're in a smaller body, you are a better person. And if you know me at all, you know I don't think that's true, but it's a real thing in our society, and it is a real thing that is taught in med school, and doctors are just incredibly fat phobic. I wish it were not the case, but it is the case. And so oftentimes people in bigger bodies will go to the doctor for a variety of different reasons and be prescribed really restrictive eating patterns that would be associated with anorexia if they were in a smaller body. All the time, people in bigger bodies are recommended to eat a 1,200 calorie diet. That's a thing that I grew up thinking was a normal amount of food for a woman to eat because I'd seen it so many places. Now I know that that is not enough food for a toddler. There's no way a fully grown adult human being should be eating 1,200 calories, but it's prescribed by doctors, diet plans all over the place. People are told to eat a diet with that little calories. That's incredibly restrictive. But because these people are in bigger bodies, it's seen as doing something productive for their health because they're trying to lose weight, and that means they're okay. There's this thing about being fat, and it's that you are acceptable as a fat person as long as you're trying to change. If you're not trying to get thinner and you're not trying to change, then you're pretty much a lazy fat person. And no one wants you to be a lazy fat person. And that is just so backwards. I don't understand. I guess I do because I grew up in this society, but I don't understand why we want to force fat people to change their bodies just because there's fat. There's no other reason behind it. And that's even like, not even to say that people who are saying, like, I want you to lose weight for your own health. That's pretty misguided too. Anti-fat bias and diet culture would lead us to believe that fat people are lazy, failed, thin people. And that's obviously not true. But it is really the MO of diet culture and anti-fat bias. And that they really would want you to believe that your body size is completely up to you. Like it's a choice. Like I just woke up one morning and was like, I really would like to be looking super curvy, a little bit fat, have a little tummy, but be very proportional. Like I did not choose what my body looks like, and neither did you. And no one looks at a tall person and says, like, you really chose to be tall. Are you going to work on being shorter today? Like that's not, we don't talk about bodies that way unless we're talking about how fat a body is or how disabled a body is. But it's really frustrating as a person living in a bigger body. As a person in a bigger body, I identify as fat. I'm reclaiming that word and happy to use it. It's not an insult. I don't owe thinness to anyone. And I also don't owe health to anyone. My health is not really up to me. And that's a misconception that we have. And again, the anti-fat bias and diet culture would love it if you thought that your health was totally up to you. It's not. There are so many pillars of health, and your food and your exercise and your regime is such a small picture of your health. Things like the social determinants of health, your environment, your access to medical care, all have a lot more to do with your health than if you eat some processed foods every now and again or not. The internet would have you believing that what you eat and how you exercise is the only thing that determines your health, but it's really not. So much of what we're taught in this society and in our education system in the US is just wrong. It is not true that people with eating disorders look a certain way. It is not true that what you eat and how you move your body is the largest determinant of how healthy you are. It's not true that if you exist in a bigger body, you are automatically more unhealthy than a person who's in a thin body. It's not true that our health is up to us and that we owe health to others. Healthism is the idea that our health is entirely up to us. And that is just so flawed. There are lots of pillars of health, and this is not something that I was taught in school, so I didn't know, but there are pillars of health. At minimum, we can talk about physical health, mental health, emotional health, and spiritual health, which would be 4 pillars of health. I'd also say there's like social health. There's a lot of different social determinants of health, but thinking about the pillars, if there are at least those 4 basic pillars of health, what you eat and how you move your body is a small percentage of your physical health. Only a small percentage of one pillar of your health is up to you. Not one whole pillar, not all 4 pillars, but healthism would have you believe that your health is completely up to you. Depending on how you eat and how you move your body, you are either healthy or unhealthy, and that's it. And that's just not the case. And a lot of these things, in my experience, were not talked about in eating disorder treatment. So instead, I was asked to stop wanting to look a certain way, to stop using these behaviors around food that brought me a lot of temporary comfort, and just let it go. I think it's important to learn about all the ways that the systems are set up against you. To me, it's empowering to recognize that a tool that has been used against me in the past, like the BMI scale, is actually pretty racist, pretty sexist, pretty outdated, not actually made by a medical professional. Then I don't look at that tool and think I'm a failed thin person. Instead, I think, wow, this system is really messed up and I want to work to change the system. When people act like our health is all up to us, I want to open their eyes to different people and different cultures and different ways of being. I want them to see that not everyone can just run down to Whole Foods and get a smoothie, and that access to food is a lot more difficult when you don't have money, you don't have a car, you don't have extra time. There's a lot of things that get in the way, and we act like it's just easy peasy. I see a lot of influencers saying we all have the same 24 hours. We don't. That's just simply not true. When we talk about recovering in a larger body, I want to think about all of the systems that are set up in place that make that more difficult. So we talked a little bit about anti-fat bias. We talked a little bit about how medical doctors are kind of set up to be anti-fat. They're a little bit fat phobic. They're taught that in med school. And so all these factors coming together for a person who's trying to get over their eating disorder. They enter treatment, and oftentimes in treatment, and I don't know if this has changed since I was in treatment, I hope it has, but a lot of times there is a pretty intense hierarchy between the eating disorders. Anorexia is seen as sort of the more elite eating disorder diagnosis to have, and then bulimia, and then maybe OSFED or eating disorder not otherwise specified. And at the very bottom of the totem pole, we have those who binge. And that's not like a spoken hierarchy, but it's a thing that our eating disorders like to do. If you are a person who is in a bigger body and you struggle with binge eating, I bet your eating disorder has told you you are not as sick as a person with anorexia. You are not, maybe you're not sick at all, and your eating disorder is not a problem. You're not as successful in your eating disorder as the person with anorexia. It's a constant comparison that our eating disorders make. But then also it's this social thing that happens. In my experience, those with anorexia are sort of seen as like the cool kids, and those with binge eating disorder or just those in a larger body are seen as the not cool kids in treatment. Again, not always the case. I hope it's not the case very often, but it was definitely the case when I went to treatment. So that's kind of the social situation that you're sitting with. And then in treatment, and a lot of our medical professionals there is some fat phobia. There is anti-fat bias. It's really unfortunate. It doesn't seem fair, but it does exist. It's real. And so things like not being allowed to talk about anti-fat bias, not even being allowed to talk about fat phobia. We did not, in eating disorder treatment, we did not talk about anti-fat bias a single time. We did not talk about fat acceptance, fat joy, the idea that you can be fat and healthy. None of that was ever discussed. It was just sort of like a thing we weren't allowed to talk about, and we were just supposed to eat the right way, the way that they were telling us to eat, but we weren't at all allowed to talk about how difficult it was to live in a fat body in this society. I think because they would have had to confront their own fat phobia if we were to have those conversations. And it was completely unfair for me to not be able to talk about that. And that's the case for most people who are recovering. Most people who are recovering from an eating disorder are not emaciated. And so they're having to confront what society thinks about bodies and then what their medical team is telling them they should be doing. Then again, in treatment, some people who are in treatment have exercise restriction because they struggle with overexercise. And if you're in a larger body or you're experiencing binge eating disorder, often you are told to exercise, that it will help with your binge eating disorder. And while I think that that can be true, and I am a big proponent of joyful movement, I am very religious about getting in joyful movement and finding things that I really enjoy now. At the time, it felt like, at the time being when I was in eating disorder treatment, it felt like the thin people didn't have to work out because their eating disorders were successful, but the fat people had to work out because we were still fat. And those words did not come directly from the treatment center, of course not. But that was the message that I got. It was not all of us should work to find more balance in our movement. All of us should be moving our bodies for joy. All of us should stop using exercise as punishment. No, it was, if you're thin, you should not be exercising. And if you're fat, you better be exercising. And that really continued the problem in my head. That wasn't just for my eating disorder. Those were the rules set in place by the treatment center. And so my eating disorder thrived. My eating disorder was happy to hear that due to my body size, I should be exercising. That went right along with the messaging that they were telling me in my head. And so that put me back. That made it difficult. It took a long time for me to heal my relationship with movement because of that situation in treatment. Oftentimes, when a person in a bigger body goes to the doctor's office, the immediate suggestion is for them to lose weight, regardless of if it's applicable to why they're at the doctor. There are some funny jokes and comics about, like, you go to the doctor for a broken arm and the doctor says, "Have you lost weight?" And it's funny because it's true. Doctors can be so lazy. If they see you in a bigger body, they just immediately turn off their doctor brain and turn on their fat phobia brain. At least it feels like that. And so, as a person trying to heal from their eating disorder, you really need to rely on a medical team to take care of you. You need to have a support team with a therapist, a dietitian, ideally a coach, a doctor. All of these people should be on your side. And if the professionals are fat phobic, it makes it really hard to let go of the eating disorder and trust the professionals, trust your body when no one sounds very accepting. No one on my treatment team when I was going through treatment was accepting of my bigger body in a way that felt genuine. Like, no one was showing me that you can live a full life in a fat body. No one was saying that, well, you may be in a bigger body, but that doesn't have anything to do with your health markers. There was no acceptance like that. It was more kind of toxic positivity pasted on the top, like, well, you should love your body. And that was the end of it. But I didn't love my body and I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And that kept me trapped in a cycle of hating my body, in shame. I I felt so uncomfortable and like my body was a problem even more because no one could even talk about it. It made so many people uncomfortable, we couldn't even talk about it. Instead, I wish that fat people were treated just as seriously as people in smaller bodies in eating disorder treatment. But I also want people in bigger bodies to be able to talk about what it's like to live in this society. There are a lot of things that fat people have to deal with, whether or not they have an eating disorder, that make it hard to exist. For example, fertility treatments. I'm currently on an IVF journey and I have an incredible doctor who is covered by my insurance and is not fat phobic, but that is a rare case. A lot of times you have to be under a certain BMI in order to have access to fertility care. And that's fat phobic. That is absolutely wild. It's so upsetting. And if that's the case for you, I hope you have a team of people you can talk to about that, because that is an even bigger reason to want to be in a small body outside of just like people are judging me in society. Doctors treat me like crap. I can't be taken seriously. No, I can't have access to the medical care that I want. That's a really big deal. More than anything else, I just want anyone in a larger body to feel safe and like they are allowed to speak about the difficulties of existing in a bigger body. Obviously, I'm not going to help you shrink your body or try to change your body, but I want to talk to you about it. I want to hear what things are making it more difficult for you, try to find ways around that. I want to help advocate for bigger body people in our society, because bigger body people exist and they're going to exist, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so there's a lot of work that we need to do, but I never want people in bigger bodies to feel silenced. I felt so silenced, and it kept the shame and blame going on in my head for years. It took me so much longer to heal because of all the shame and because of the things that I wasn't allowed to talk about. So please, please, if you're in a bigger body, I want you to know it is okay if you still flirt with the idea of wanting to lose weight, or you just flat out want to lose weight. It is okay if you're tempted by the Ozempic craze right now. It makes sense if you want to lose weight and you also know that you're not going to pursue dieting, but you wish you could and you're grieving that. That makes sense to me. Recovering in a larger body or just giving up on dieting in a larger body is really hard. The cards are stacked against you, and it's a special type of hell that I understand, and I'm sorry if you understand. All this to say, I want to talk to more people who are recovering in a larger body or who have just given up on dieting and are existing in a larger body. And I want to hear about what ways the world gets in your way, but I also want to hear about all the fucking joy you have. Being fat does not mean that your life ends. I do fat Pilates. I have a very fat, sexy life. I live in a way that I absolutely love. My life is so, so fulfilling. And also, I'm fat. That can exist. And I want to bring more voices to this podcast of people who also experience life in a fat body so we can talk about the highs and the lows, because I didn't have that growing up. And I think having fat representation is so, so important. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Being fat and recovering is hard work, but it's so, so worth it.